Yes, hello everybody, and welcome to what we call Full Course Yellow. This is the in-pit lane after show, the very after show, because the show goes to air Tuesday night, and of course it is now Thursday. But we're here for a chat about all things motorsport for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so, and we'll be joined by some of our panel later on. We've got a few missing tonight. Pete's not with us tonight. Got some computer problems, but on a sad note, I'd just like to start the program off by letting you know that just before the show started, I got a phone call from our friend Stuart Fairweather to let us know that his father had passed away suddenly this afternoon. And obviously our condolences go out to Stuart and his family. His dad was a great guy. This is where Stuart got his love of motorsport and motoring and all things motoring from his dad and his mum, for that matter. They were huge sort of car collectors and lovers of cars, very heavily involved in the Nissan Car Club for many years, and still heavily involved as well. So came about very suddenly and quite a shock. So our condolences to Stuart and all his family over the loss of his father this afternoon. So a bit of a sad way to start the program, but as they say, the show must go on, and it'll go on for a little while anyway, because obviously not the happiest of evening. Before we introduce the team, Box is with us once again. So g'day to Box, g'day to Dave Howard as well. Dave is with us, and also to Tony P. Tony P. Evening to Tony, and evening to anybody who's watching us at the moment. Let's check out the panel for tonight, and we've got Craig, Doc Latigo, Dave Stillwell, and Chris Ritchie joining us to talk about all things motorsport. Well, I suppose we'll start off with what happened on the weekend, which was the Bathurst 6-hour race. And Dave, you had a look at it. I didn't see it. I don't have Stan. I saw a few highlights here and there that were floating about online. But what were your impressions of it overall?
Well, a bit of a change for 2022. This, of course, is the first year of the Stan and Channel 9 media package for the ARG Speed Series. Of course, the Bathurst 6-hour used to be an independent event run by Yeehaw Events by James O'Brien. It was recently purchased by Motorsport Australia and the ARG, so they run it effectively as part of the Shannon's Motorsport or the Shannon's Nationals kind of level of category. So unlike in previous years where we might have had, say, SBS or Channel 7 coverage, or indeed we might have had live streaming over YouTube or by an event partner. We had live streaming on Saturday and Sunday. Of course, live timing via Natsoft. Looks like we had a great slew of categories. If we deal with the supports first, there was, of course, over 20 cars aboard the Super Cheap Auto TCR Australia Series. Some very impressive performances from the Peugeots. I was actually chatting live with Milenko Vukovic from Vukovic Motorsport in Switzerland, who, of course, is the architect behind the Renault Megane RS TCR cars. He got to see one of his cars take a podium performance with James Moffat in race 2, the reverse top 10 race. Two dominant races from Aaron Cameron. Again, very dominant performances from all the Peugeots, which is interesting given they've got the smallest engine in the TCR field, but they are on the BOP weights, one of the lightest cars. The youngster, the Ginger Ninja, Bailey Sweeney, rocket to the front of the field in the Hyundai i30 TCR. There from Morecambe, from the Morecambe team. He took out the second race of 3. Aboard the Trans Ams, it was all about Nathan Hearn out the front. Friend of the show, Benjamin Grice, had his dad there. I think that relationship certainly mellowed, as would my relationship with my racing father over the last 10 years. Ben had a shifter brake during, I think, the second of the ARG Trans Am races. But other than that, there was some Nissan MRF Pulsar racing. There was apparently some New South Wales Historic Group N racing, but you'd struggle to find it on the live streaming because, unfortunately, not everything was out there. And then, of course, we had the main event, the High Tech Oils Bathurst 6 Hour, And this has, grown to be effectively the pinnacle for production car racing, both locally and indeed in the region. Hence the reason it's attracted the support of a international tyre supplier such as MRF, based out of Chennai in India. So all the cars in the field, almost record number of cars in the field. They had over 80 expressions of interest. They took 70 entries, and I believe they started 63 cars. Mad Cow Mark, why am I last here? And first thumbs up. That's just the way we like it, Mad Cow. 63 cars took the start of the race. There were a number of retirements before they got to the start of the race, including one of the favoured runners in A2, my good friend Lindsay Kearns aboard the Kearns and Cowan earlier model Ford Mustang in Class A2. That car got put in the fence early. It was a debut of a number of new cars, including a car that was being finished off and shaken down at Wakefield in the same week. That, of course, was the brand new M2 Competition from the eventual outright winners of Tom Sargent and Cameron Hill. Of course, Cameron and his family team based out of Canberra built the car up. It was touch and go whether the car was going to make it to the event, but they ended up putting in a very dominant performance in qualifying with Tom Sargent on board. Got sent to the back of the grid due to a ride height infringement at the end of qualifying scrutineering, and so had to start a Bathurst Enduro from the back of the grid. And we know how that works out for some people. This is the first time someone's won a race from, I believe, 62nd or 63rd on the grid. So for those of you who know map panorama, if we look at the map behind my head, normally the start line's about here, which is where he wanted to be, and Sargent and Hill were starting around about here. Of course, a rolling start behind the I-30N safety car there. Great strategic battles throughout the race, a number of high-profile, supercar and GT and high-level Australian motorsport personalities in the field. A rather unnerving number of mechanical difficulties experienced by a number of the front-running BMWs. Had a chat with Beric Linton in the days following the event on his drive back up the coast. A number of the issues that struck the Bruce Linton BM service team cars and prepared cars were issues they'd never experienced before. So these, of course, are production-based race cars. They don't start life as a GT3 or a GT4 car that starts as a body in white with all of the road car difficulties taken out of the car. They start as cars that you buy out of a showroom, or in a lot of cases, they're stat write-offs from water damage or ones that have been driven a bit too spiritedly up a mountain road, and trying to make them work for 6 hours in very trying conditions whilst getting the most performance out of them means you do run into some electronic gremlins now and again. But Bathurst delivers. It went down to the last stint after the last safety car with just under an hour to go. It was Tim Slade, who was aboard the BMW M3, of course. He ran in that car last year. He was holding off Cameron Hill towards the end. Cameron Hill did pit. They didn't have the best strategy in terms of getting their compulsory stops out of the way early enough. Resumed the race after the last pit stop with about a 50-second deficit, but more importantly, with two brand new tyres on the right-hand side of the car. A safety car within the last hour closed that gap up to about 10 seconds, and then we were treated to a thrilling pass over Skyline on the drop down into the S's, where apparently you don't pass, but if you ask Richard Mork, a certain E30 might have passed him in that spot once or twice before. In third place was Nick Percat, driving with Ron and Shane Rubis. Of course, that car was also the race-winning car last year, a BMW M4, with some assistance out of the Beric Linton BM service garage. The story of the Bathurst 6 Hour, of course, is the battles up and down the field in the classes. So a shout-out to a friend of the show, Dylan O'Keefe, who took out Class A1 aboard a Garth Walden Racing Mercedes-AMG A45. That's the Marty Sheargold entry. And then also in that A2 category, finally Grant Denyer gets to take home a Bathurst winning trophy. He shared with a local legend or an international legend in Tony Quinn, who of course they upgraded their Mustang GT into a Mustang Mach-1 with a new gearbox and the new aerodynamic components that go along with that. And then up and down the field, even friend of the show from the Victorian Mini Club, managed to make it to the end. That was the Holloway and Brown Toyota Celica. One of the original Bates Celicas managed to come home. Their goal was to finish, and they did that in Class D. Class E, the compact class, got to give a big shout out to our mate Andrew McMaster and his friends from Improved Production New South Wales, who ran a basically bog standard Mazda 3 SP25 around and took out Class E. They did win the honours in the Improved Production battle because they did beat a number of Improved Production Victoria stalwarts in the Champ Racing Suzuki team. So I'm a big fan of what is effectively Australia's biggest club race for production cars. If you are looking for a long-distance event at Bathurst, this is definitely the place to start. It's certainly becoming something of, every year there's a new different car to have. At the moment, it looks like it's a good thing that to be in a position to be selling new and reasonably well-priced used BMWs, because there's probably going to be a few people looking for an M2 competition for the 2023 edition of the Bathurst 6 Hour. I believe you're on mute, Brett. There we go.
There we go. That was one of the things, after the race, Tim Slade said, and Barry Rogers has now come in and sort of agreed with him, that they're just concerned about the fact, the first 7 cars were all German cars, 6 of them were BMWs, and Tim was saying that, if things go the way they were, the way it looked going, that next year we'll have, if you want to win, you're going to have a BMW M2 competition, because it was clearly the car to beat. There it was very fast. It was, as you said, coming from the back of the grid, and that didn't seem to hamper them too much. The problem is with you start talking about things like, he was mentioning things like balance of performance and all the rest of it. This is the dangerous pathway when you start talking about production cars, because suddenly how much do you slow things down? How much do you let people improve the cars to make them a little faster? Which way do you go, and how far do you let them modify these things in order to make it exciting and good racing for the people who are watching, before it becomes no longer production car racing?
So the important thing to remember here is that there are multiple different components to what makes this race turn out the way it does. From a regulatory perspective, in terms of what you are and are not allowed to do to the cars, that's per the Motorsport Australia 3E, or series, what used to be called series production regulations. So whether you're driving a Class E, Mazda 3 SP25 or a Suzuki Swift, right through to top end of the town in an M3, an M4, or even an M2 competition, the amount of things you are allowed to change on the car from original are exactly the same for every car throughout the field. So you've got a level of investment in the cars that people may or may not be making. You have a level of investment in development of those packages. So everyone can go out and buy a $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 set of shocks on the car, but it's spending the time and energy with an engineer who's going to work through a test program with a driver that knows what they're doing to extract all of that development out of that platform. While these are in terms of a race category, are the closest to showroom stock that we have in terms of a high-profile national series, there is still scope for development. If you have a look at the supplementary regulations for the event, where it lists all of the eligible vehicles, what you'll find is that in the cars that feature forced induction, be that a supercharger or a turbocharger, they're listed with a maximum boost pressure. So all the cars that run a forced induction engine are required to run a boost monitor. And as part of the recognition document for 3E that's supplied by Motorsport Australia, so that's saying, this car comes with this size engine, with this size turbo, and this is the transmission, and this size brakes, and these size wheels. One of the things in that is the turbo boost pressure. And that was a bit of a bone of contention leading into the event, because if you look at the car that won the event, the M2 Competition, of the 3 specifications of M2, it's actually the middle one, whereas so it doesn't have from factory as much boost as, say, an M3 competition or an M4 competition would have. But for the event, they were permitted to. Those cars have exactly the same engine as supplied by BMW, with a beautiful S55 3-litre twin turbo engine. But for some reason, for this event, that car was permitted to run the exact same level of boost as the heavier M3 and M4. The cars are within about 20 to 30 kilos in terms of their required minimum racing weight, but the M2 is a much smaller car, and with the addition of some components that were allowed to be run on the car, it was much more able to make its racing weight versus the M3 and M4s that, even with the lightest weight roll cages and the minimal amount of safety equipment in the car, very much struggle getting down to those racing weight. That's the car with the driver and fuel on board of around about 1,500 kilos. So production car racing is always a continual evolution. If we go back to when the Bathurst 12 Hour kind of reignited the spark for production car endurance racing at Bathurst in 2007, at that point in time, the price cap limit for production cars was $100,000. So you didn't have BMW M3s and M4s. We didn't have an M4 back then anyway, or Mercedes C63. The highest specification BMW you could get into that race was the BMW 335, the E92 chassis car. That's where the cars like the Mitsubishi Evo 10 at that time, or Evo 9, and the Subaru WRX STI. Those cars were effectively anonymous in the race, where they're a B1 or an A1 class competitor. They've definitely been outclassed because technology has moved on. We've gone from almost every car in the field having a Synchromesh, H-pattern 5 or 6-speed gearbox to, with 15 years later from that, again, James O'Brien, production car event, we've now got cars that are running 7 or 8 speed, paddle shifted, dual clutch transmissions. I even spoke with Rob Braun this afternoon, who had a reasonably good run in Class A1 in a close to standard, like showroom tune, showroom size brakes, stock calipers, even BMW M135 hatch. He actually ran the 8-speed automatic because that's the transmission that BMWs run in the M235i and M240i race car at the Nürburgring. It works. Technology has moved on so far. We've gone from having cars where the brake rotors were, say, 320 mil or 330 mil in diameter in the front-running cars, and they were on an 8-inch or an 8.5-inch wide rim, whereas the cars running at the front are running 9-inch wide, 9.5-inch wide rims. They're running brakes that are, as big as what you find in a V8 supercar, 380, 390 mil in diameter. Tyres have come a long way. Turbocharged engines are far more prevalent at the front end of the field far more than they were 15 years ago. And of course, the ability to get performance out of the engines is very different these days. So while I can appreciate, Tim Slade and Barry Rogers' observation that, something needs to be done, we're not really experiencing anything different than what happened, say, 4 or 5 years ago when the first M3 and M4s turned up. When the Mercedes AMG A45s turned up. It is a production car, and it's indicative of just how good production cars have got. The one thing I do think people need to keep in mind for the next 5 to 10 years of production car racing is what's the availability going to be like in the showroom of cars that still continue to have high performance that relies solely upon an internal combustion engine? Because that's going to be one of the big tricky things to handle in the next 5 or 10 years is the showroom's evolution into using either substantially hybridized vehicles or even pure EV vehicles. So it's one race that gets away without having to use the BOP word, the BOP hammer. If we consider, the big 3 Bathurst Enduros, we've got a Supercars 1,000 kilometre race where the cars, once you take the composite skin off, are identical underneath for all intents and purposes. We have the BOP, big day out, which is the Bathurst 12 Hour for FIA GT3 and GT4 cars. This event stands on its own in that the relative merits of the production car underneath are allowed to be showcased. And that was the whole point of production car racing at Bathurst, 60 years ago. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday. I'll need to check in with the sales staff at our BMW dealerships to see how many orders they got for BMW M2s over the weekend.
You'd know better than most. I mean, what sort of price you're looking at for that model M2 competition?
So an M2 competition, again, these are all recommended retail figures before you factor in LC, before you factor in stamp duty, dealer delivery, all that kind of stuff, which is what the rules are based on. It used to be that the price cap was $100,000. which is why you had stuff like the BMW 335 in. That cap jumped to 150,000, I believe, in 2016, around about the time the Sharon family took over the running of production cars. But a BMW M2 Competition, I believe, has a recommended retail in the 118,000, whereas something like the M3 LCI that Berwick Linton's running has a recommended retail price of 149,600 or something. So it's literally just in under the $150,000 cap as per the Red Book value that allows it to be competitive, which is why we see the late model BMWs, but we perhaps don't see, for instance, the Audi RS4 or RS5 equivalents, because their base price is over 150,000. That's why we don't see the 205 chassis Mercedes C63 with the twin turbo V8, because that car starts at over $150,000. Now, again, that's the recommended retail for a brand new one. A lot of these cars do start life as a water damage car or a stat write-off or an insurance write-off car, because they can't be used on the road anymore, but they can be repaired and used in a motorsport environment. So they almost get a second life, certainly a lot harder than their first life.
So what would you say is the solution to it? I mean, avoiding the fact that, that we don't want it to be sort of, like the BMW Cup, or at least I don't. Anyway, you might, because you sell the things, but you sell other things as well. So
I think we should all be racing BMW E30s around Bathurst for 6 hours. There we go.
There you go. Or Excels.
I think certainly for the event, they really need to focus on selling the class structure better in terms of encouraging class participation. This year, effectively, Class B didn't exist. So Class B you had B1 for forced induction cars and Class B2 for normally aspirated cars. This year, there was only, I think, less than 3 or 4 cars total in Class B. Whereas when you look at Class C, the hot hatch class, there's plenty of cars in there, but we perhaps don't see the recognition, perhaps, either from the event overall or in terms of the focus of the telecast. Something I hate using the quota word, but if we think back to the quota system that's in place for TCR Australia, they limit the total number of cars from each brand to a maximum level. Touring Car Masters was discussing the same thing, so it didn't just become a Mustang Fest or a Camaro Fest. Given that they had over 80 expressions of interest for the event, for a total of 70 accepted, and 63 started the race. Yeah. I'd certainly hope there's some scope within those 14 cars that didn't get accepted for their entry, that they won't be discouraged from applying again in 2020 for the event in 2023, but that perhaps there's not as much a focus on the top end of town in Class X, that there's more Class A cars and Class B cars. If I'm sure we'd love to have a Class E of 10 cars, have some Suzuki Swifts with some Mazda 2s and some Mazda 3s, get a couple of Hyundai Getzas in there. That'd be a wonderful thing to see. But it's a very difficult thing to try to walk around with a BOP hammer and go, oh, that car's too fast. Because if we look at the 2 M2s in the field, one was streeting away by over 2 seconds a lap in qualifying, ignoring the ride height discrepancy. The other car, again, no offense intended to them, but they weren't top 5 material in that car. It's a combination of the very latest and best from BMW in terms of power to weight and the package that it is, with 2 drivers that if you took another look at it and cleaned your glasses off, you'd probably go, one of them's a Formula Ford champion. Both of them are Formula Ford series winners, and one of them's the Carrera Cup champion. You'd certainly say that both of them are either pros or very, very close to being pros. Cameron Hill, certainly. I mean, he's been tapped on the shoulder with 888 Race Engineering for a Super 2 campaign in 2022. Maybe they need to look at, how they allocate driving time for a professional driver. Do they need to look at the FIA driver rating system in some form in terms of, saying who is and isn't allowed? Because that's one of the other contentious issues of the race is, there was a much Berwick Linton talked about building a car for Richard Davison and his two sons, Alex and Will, to share. Unfortunately, Alex is a long-time professional racer from back in the GT2 days at Le Mans. And of course, Will is still a professional, platinum ranked, effectively factory driver for Ford with Dick Johnson Racing and supercars. So, Richard can't race with his two sons because they're both pros. They have in the rules the power to go, we're going to give that car some extra weight. We're going to take some ride height away from that car. We're going to take some boost away from that car. But it's a very slippery slope to start doing that because there's people in fast cars going fast and there's people in fast cars going slow. So do you want to try to BOP certain examples of certain cars or BOP the car model as a whole? So it'll be a discussion for people at a far higher pay grade than I, and certainly they will definitely get a variety of competitor input into that. But for my two penneth worth, I'd really like to focus on really celebrating a lot of the class performances and focusing on those interclass battles, and maybe, as an organizer, selecting, more appropriate cars to fill the grid out. Some of the cars in the field are starting to look very long in the tooth. Perhaps, they need to start looking at a rolling, total number of years out of production window, to start rolling those cars out of the event. But again, that will then become a bit of a problem as we start to approach a showroom that has a much higher percentage of hybrid and EV vehicles on board.
Yeah, well, the other problem that you've got nowadays is that back in the day, in the golden era of series production racing, I mean,
sorry, could you put the sepia tone on so we can say we're going back in the day?
Back in my day, you had basically everybody bought a sedan. You had a Falcon, you had a Commodore, you had a Monaro or a Tirana or a Charger, or you had something like that. Well, nowadays, of course, as I look around here, as I go for a walk and park in the local car park, you don't see a sedan anymore. Not even the odd hatch. They're all SUVs, mini SUVs, and big SUVs, and perhaps that's the next step. I mean, perhaps we should have an SUV class in the 6 hours.
That was one of Speed Cafe through their Talk Cafe channel did run after the event. The top 5 cars we'd like to see. One of which was the the Alfa Romeo Giulia QV, the Quattro Valvolve, Quattrofoglio. That car, of course, is just under the $150,000 price cap as well. 4-door sedan, 3-litre, twin turbo, 500 odd horsepower, V6, 8-speed transmission, rear wheel drive. On paper has all the goods, but it's not as common a platform in the aftermarket for getting support. So certainly a team could build one, but I think they'd be very much, as Mark Scaife would say, they would be very much the pioneer of that brand. Take a look at the Class A2. It's basically all Mustangs and HSV or Holden Commodores. And of course, this year marked the debut for the Lexus RCF. That's trying to do something different, but it's a 5-litre V8 just like a Mustang. It comes with, I think, an 8-speed automatic, unlike a Mustang, which comes with a 6-speed manual or a 10-speed auto. It weighs about 50 or 60 kilos racing weight more than a Mustang. It's on the same size tyre and the same size brakes. So if you've got a car that doesn't have the aftermarket support, is heavier, and probably doesn't make as much horsepower as the other cars in your class, what can you realistically expect to get out at the end of 6 hours worth of racing? There's an argument to say you can do what you love as much as you want, but if you're going there and you want to win, well, it kind of makes sense to build what everyone else is building. I think someone's got a fan on in the background.
Yeah, something.
I'll check my mute. It's not me.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that's coming from. It's not at this end, so I'm not sure what's going.
No, I heard it right at the start of the show.
Yeah, I think
I've
that's
just turned my mute off, and it's still after I hit mute, it still kept coming through. So it's not me either.
But anyway, I think kudos to everyone involved in bringing the 6 Hour to fruition, to ARG, to all the Motorsport Australia volunteers, to the Stan Sport crew who helped put it together. Telecast looked great. Shout out to Richard Crail, Matt Nolte, Matty White, of course Molly Taylor, and Greg Rust as well. Everyone up and down pit lane. Chris Stubbs as well. Did a fantastic job bringing that race to air. As I said, my 2 cents worth to producers is probably to focus a bit more on those class battles rather than just who's falling out of Class X with the mechanical gremlin now. So
Everyone's forgotten. Is it Slidey had an input? Did everyone read what Tim said?
Yeah, no, we were talking about that. And that is the problem with it. But anyway, it was
M4. New one.
Yeah, it was. Doc, could you just hit your mute for a second?
I did. I've already tried it. I'll do it again.
Yeah, because that's getting worse. That's getting worse and worse. So I'm not sure where that's coming from. But that's just getting a bit annoying. So we might.
When I mute, so it was fine.
Okay. Well, we might get through it.
So it sounds like we've got our own electronic gremlins about 15 minutes in, just like some of the leading Class X BMWs.
Yes, very much so. And like the car that we unfortunately didn't see, which was the Marcus Ambrose George Badecki Mustang, which didn't even get onto the track. I mean, they went up and did some testing, and unfortunately, they couldn't find their electronic gremlin. So it would have been interesting to see those two guys, because we saw how well, certainly in class, the Tony Quinn Grant Denyer Mustang went. So you would think that with the might of Gary Rogers Motorsport behind them, and Marcus and George is a good steerer as well, you would imagine that would have been quite the battle. But
well, that's probably one of the other things to touch on is the cars that run really well at the front. So Beric Linton and his team, they don't just run the car at one event a year. They commit to the Australian Production Car Series, and they run in either the New South Wales or the Queensland Production Car rounds. So they're constantly putting drivers through the car. They're constantly getting their technicians to figure out what's wearing out, what's causing them gremlins. So they've got a 12-month process of testing, tuning, evaluating, developing, building reliability into the cars. So it was just such a shock to see so many of their team members suffer, or cars of very similar specification suffer from issues with. Oh, there we go. And it
not
stopped.
sure what happened there, but yep.
There we go. See, you leave it for long enough, folks, and it resets just like a check engine light.
Is it back?
Oh, and it's back.
You spoke too soon.
It's me.
Too soon. Yeah. There we go.
It's me.
Yeah, it looks like it's Chris has got a problem.
Well, that's the problem. You've got the old car in the background. Probably doesn't even have it doesn't have a filter on the alternator charge wire. It's probably causing all sorts of havoc on the radio inside, and the spark plug's going haywire. You'll have to get the diagnostic machine and smack the carburetor with a. I'm
gentle persuader.
The gentle persuader.
I'll just point out what Mark is saying there. We're really blessed. I mean, I didn't see, as I said, I didn't have Stan. But you really, I mean, it would have been lovely to have seen all of the races on there. But you hardly need to pay for anything now if you just want to watch some great motor racing. I mean, last weekend I was watching stuff. I was watching British racing, British club racing, and GP. GB3 and GB4. I was also watching the stuff from the European Le Mans series, and there was drag racing on, as there is, as Mark's saying, live drag racing. Overtaking Lane on YouTube have had live drag racing. The more drag racing from Willowbank. Absolutely tons of motorsport on YouTube at the moment. We try wherever possible to put up links to that. We had also stuff from France. We had our mate Hugh Barter, and congratulations to Hugh Barter for his performance on the weekend. 2 wins from the opening round of the French Formula 4 Championship. So so Hugh, well done, and they were both on and are still available on YouTube. Did a great job there. We put that up on, put a couple of those races up as well. So good to see another young
Well,
I managed
Australian
to,
doing really well.
Netflix dropped 30-something% today as well too. So maybe when they start putting some motorsport and broaden their horizons, you can jump on that. Or I saw another deal today. KO are still doing $15 for 12-month deal. Came up again today. I saw it as well.
Speaking of KO and speaking of free, I found out this afternoon as I flipped on to see what was on the freebie. If you're not a subscriber to KO, they do have some free channels on. It's usually stuff like local football, local cricket, that sort of thing. This weekend, it is practice, qualifying, and the sprint race from Imola, and also practice and qualifying from MotoGP as well, and that's all free on. So if you've got the KO app on your television, on your TV, or on your Chromecast or Apple TV or something, you can actually watch. I don't know about I didn't see anything about the Grand Prix themselves, but certainly the sprint race, because this is the return of the sprint races this weekend at Imola. The sprint race on Saturday will be Saturday night, Saturday evening will be seen live and free on KO. So you've got some opportunities
Formula
to pick up
One.
and watch some Formula One stuff.
Formula One at Imola with a sprint race with Ferrari, 2 Ferraris competitive. Italy is going to be mental on the weekend.
Yeah, also that's what I watched as well. Yes, thanks, Mark. Yes, watch Santa Pod as well. Santa Pod put on a great show. If you know, Santa Pod is the drag strip in England. They put on the most amazing show because it doesn't matter. They had a really good meeting on the weekend. They had Top Fuel. They had a couple of Fuel Funny cars there. They had some fabulous Pro Mod, the Top Door Slammer style cars running there as well. But they always have jet cars. They've always got something, sort of a circus act somewhere. Great coverage. So and as Mark says, basically every week now over the summer, you will see something from Santa Pod. And it's always worth tuning into. They have there's some bizarre and wonderful things running around.
Did you say a drag strip or the drag strip in the UK?
It's basically in England. It is basically the drag strip.
Right. Yes, because they've got far more circuits than their tiny country should have. You know, that's a legacy of a number of World War II air bases being strewn up and down the country. But I always notice, like, Santa Pod sounds like, oh, you got, Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, Santa this in the US. No, Santa Pod, that's where the drag racing happens. It's always been a mystery to me how popular, drag racing is in the UK. A lot of the US, post-World War II nostalgia for hot rods and drag racing and big muscle and things like that.
The quality is excellent. I mean, when you have a look at the quality of the cars, not just, and it's absolutely huge in the Scandinavian countries as well. So you have a lot of cars coming from Denmark and Sweden and all those sorts of places coming down and running as well. So the drag racing, it's really at the very highest standard there. But you do also get some really bizarre things. They have a class there which is essentially sort of drag racing supercars. And they're just insane. I mean, these tiny little supercarts with, 750 and 1200cc Hayabusa engines in them and all that sort of, supercharged and, running with nitrous and God knows what. It's just insane. So that's a lot of fun. So, yeah, if you're looking, one night, any Saturday night during the summer or during the European summer, yeah, chances are if you flick over and I would subscribe to the Santa Pod channel because it's well worth it. Coming up, we'll just say this is a good news story which I saw this afternoon. Wayne Rainey, of course, who was left paraplegic after a MotoGP crash, is coming back and is going to ride on a modified version of his old MotoGP bike at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, going up the hill. And as soon as his mates, the people he competed against in the day, his main rivals, Mick Doohan, Kevin Swantz, and one other whose name I've forgotten at the moment, But they basically saw that and said, "Hey, if you're going to be there, mate, we're going to be there too." So they're all going to go back there again, and they're going to have a get together, and just great. Will be great to see Wayne going up the hill again on a specially modified bike, and it'll be fabulous news.
It's not like they're a half competitive bunch, is it? No.
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 I mean,
They'll all be the social. There won't be any. No one will look at a stop with bullshit. They will be banging as hard as they can, trying to go faster than anyone. The only thing that'll stop the swinging is the fact they'll all be wearing leathers.
Yeah, I think so. It'll be that's great news there. Now there's the story that
Doc's going to have to explain this one because I don't follow football. What's the deal here? Someone's selling a thing, and some high-profile athletes are looking to buy into it.
Yeah, Doc, have you got the details?
I'll bring it up again here. Where was it? Let's see.
Basically, the short of it is Lewis Hamilton.
I only just looked.
Consortium.
I've only been looking at the highlights today with different things. Don't forget the Expo's coming. It was on the GT2 KTM. Is going to be at Bathurst for 12 hours. I will see that in its flesh. Hopefully, you guys do too. That would be really good. Where is that? Where was it?
Yeah, basically the deal is the Chelsea Football Club. There's a rumour of a takeover of the Chelsea Football Club in the English Premier League. So it's a big deal. It's one of the most famous clubs in all of English football. And there's a consortium which includes among it Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams getting together to take over Chelsea Football Club. So I suppose they're both cashed up and they want somewhere to spend their money. So so that could be a bit bizarre. I'm not sure how reliable that is. I mean, I think it's coming from Sky News or something. Are
these the same people that keep reiterating that VW and Audi are joining Formula One? Joining
Formula One, they're definitely there. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt.
Look, I'll go to a reliable source because it's come up the first on the feed rather than going through the auto stuff that we usually go through. I'll go through the Mirror. So it's a
speaking of reliable media.
Yeah, very reliable English media. Save an exit on all. I just asked me to upgrade my cookies to have a look at it. So yes, I'm not really interested in that. The seventh, to invest 10 mil. That is 10 million pounds. That is 10 million pounds each. With the Chelsea, to the following sanctions made to owner Roman Abramovich. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it was Roman Abramovich. Okay.
I thought it might have been. Save an exit on those cookies. Get off the screen, you little doodad. Anyway, it just says is being spearheaded by it's being spearheaded by former British Airways chairman Sir Martin Broughton.
Oh, I see. Very nice. Well, that'll be marvelous.
So 10 million quid. So Lewis would have that hiding down the back of his couch. Serena's probably got it wadded up in the bottom of her tennis bag from all the endorsement deals. So was it Venus or Serena?
Serena,
yeah. No, she's definitely got that lying in the bottom of one of her tennis bags from the endorsement deals. I guess this is one of the, unforeseen consequences of the, Russian aggression in the Ukraine.
So they're in the mix because their consortium with Sir Martin Broughton, and there's the 3 or 4 of them, or there's probably a few
and
more
Sir
involved.
Lewis.
And Sir Martin, Sir Lewis, it's probably, I don't know what mantle. Serena, it's got a
Serena, yes. Sir Lewis and Serena and Sir whatever. You've got to be a Sir.
I found something.
This sounds like a really serious.
Does that include Sergio?
Well, it could be.
Yes, we'll have to get Sergio.
Perez could be in it too. You never know. Anyway, so they're not done deal yet because there's 3 finalists being considered by the Rain Group, and their Rain Group are the ones who are overseeing the auction, and they're a US merchant bank that are overseeing it. So, on behalf of Roman Abramovich, so the West London. Yeah. Anyway, then it just goes on to tell you all the accolades that Serena and Sir Lewis have achieved in their lives. But anyway.
And yes, Brock was a director, was on the board of Collingwood at one stage and was very heavily involved in the...
Got out at the right time then, did he?
Yeah, well, it was very heavily involved in what was called the New Magpies, and that was sort of, the pathway, setting the pathway to Eddie Maguire becoming involved. So Brock was heavily involved in that because a lifelong Collingwood supporter, mad keen Collingwood supporter, and so he was involved. He was involved for a while. So so anyway, that's interesting. I don't know if you've seen the footage. Very lucky escape for Australia's Will Power at the Indy Test Day. Scott Dixon and Mark and Scott McLaughlin doing a great job. Dixon was fastest overall. Scott was the fastest of the so-called non-tow brigade there of the weekend or of the day. He did a really good job. But Will Power had a huge spin, and it was frighteningly reminiscent of the Alex Zanardi situation. Colton Herter had to dive out and just missed him. Otherwise, it would have been an absolutely huge crash.
There are no small accidents at Indy.
No, it's absolutely terrifying. That's what Will said. He said it frightened the living daylights out of me, to paraphrase.
There'll be a lot of drivers who'll have their dry cleaners on speed dial for the month of May. So.
It's one of those races, the Indy 500, I love it and all the rest, but it is a race where you sort of go to bed, because of the time that it's on here in Australia. Like, I don't usually watch the whole race. I might watch the first, 8 or 10 laps or something and then probably go to bed. But I always wake up with a sense of dread the next morning and think, as soon as I, look online or turn the radio on or something like that, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that the first thing that I'm, going to see is not going to be that there was a huge crash in Indianapolis and we've lost a driver or something. But I mean, it's much safer now. But as you say, there is no such thing as a small crash in Indy, and it's a very scary race in many respects. But once again, well done, Scotty McLaughlin. This is only his second time at the Brickyard, and he's done another fabulous job. So,
well, he's already won at Indy before. I mean, it was virtual, but he's won at Indy before.
Well, yeah, as you say, virtual, yeah. So, but personally, I don't think that counts. So anyway, so that was there. The Miami Grand Prix, which is coming up after Imola, because a plan by local residents to try and get the thing stopped has been thrown out by a judge. The argument that they used is that they were all going to suffer irreversible hearing loss because of the terrifying scream of a Formula One engine. Clearly, they have not been anywhere near a Formula One engine in the modern era. So, but the judge basically said, "Wear earplugs." So, the Miami Grand Prix is going ahead. So so that's good news. Ferrari have unveiled the new GT3. Has anybody seen that? What a weapon that is!
Is how you say a very speciale.
It's very special. It's also very unique in the fact that it's been co-developed with Orica.
Well, this is a bit of a change for Ferrari, of course.
Huge
for
change.
years, their GT racing partner was Michelotto, who, of course, were instrumental in building both the GT3 variants and the GT2 or GTE variant cars. And, of course, the preceding car, the 488, the more recent car, which, of course, runs the turbocharged 2.9-litre V8, I think, from memory. That car was developed by Michelotto as both, it could be a GT3 car or it could be a GTE car, with a change of bodywork and a change of engine and some brakes and electronics and things like that. But this, of course, is the some promo video. So, It's the road going. So that'll be that's the Spider or the drop top, the Targa. but it would indicate that Ferrari has continued to make a beautiful looking car. I'm surprised they're launching it not in red. I thought that was some sort of ethical violation of Italian law. Ferraris must be red, but it does look like that one's got a folding hardtop, which is nice.
Yes, it
of
has.
course,
Yes, it's also the road going version is also a hybrid.
Yes, of course. I mean, that hybrid motor system won't be permitted in GT3 racing, but it'll be interesting to see now that GT3 will be coming online at Le Mans from 2024 as a Pro-Am only category. And of course, Ferrari will be debuting their hypercar prototype in 2023 as well for the 100th running of Le Mans. It behooves them to choose a partner who has decades and decades of success operating at the highest level of both prototype racing and, of course, GT racing. We mustn't forget Oreca had a very auspicious period being the European operator and developer of the Viper chassis on behalf of the Chrysler Dodge Corporation, where they were very strong and very dominant in the GT2, GTE era of the sport. No, that might have been GTS, NGT. I don't know. It becomes all a bit of an alphabet soup when you start talking about that. But there hasn't been an ugly Ferrari for about the last 15 years. So it's nice to see this car continuing it. It doesn't have too many flicks and spindles and lots of weird things going on. It actually looks reasonably clean in its appearance on the outside, which certainly does to make things a bit easier for the aero people to work on. There you go.
That's easy for you to say.
Yeah. But no, I'm very much looking forward to seeing the latest fleet of GT3 cars arrive. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like we'll be getting a new model BMW M2 GT3 car for the Liqui Moly Bathurst 12 Hours. Unfortunately, just too logistically difficult to get the latest cars here for a Pro-Am team to run. But hopefully for the 2023 edition, we'll start seeing some Ferrari, we'll start seeing some factory-backed teams turning back up again in the all-pro category. Maybe we'll see some factory Ferrari support either for some internationals or a local team. I'm sure Peter Edwards will have his name down to pick up another one of those first off the rank fairly soon as well.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what sort of turns up for this year, because they've opened up the categories and all sorts of things. As Doc mentioned before, the KTM, a GT2 KTM, and if you go back to our interview with Stefan Rattel at Phillip Island just recently, Stefan was saying how important he saw the GT2 category in the years to come becoming, and so we'll see the KTM car there, and that will be basically the similar to identical to the GT4 car that has run there before, but with a 600 horsepower engine, quite a bit heavier, and without not all of the aerodynamics side, but it'll still be a very, very fast car, and that's going to run in the invitation category, which is where the marked cars will be running as well, and possibly even some older supercars. They're letting the cars from Super 3 enter as well, so that could throw the cat amongst the pigeons if the conditions are right.
Definitely. I think GT2 is kind of, where GT3 was sort of 15 or 17 years ago, where the cars were a lot closer to their production counterparts and were less reliant upon aerodynamics to generate all of their performance. Whereas, as we see with, this is new GT2, not old GT2. I'm sure there's a line in there about a milk ad somewhere. I just want GT2 that tastes like real GT2. But these are, with other cars in the GT2 class include the Audi R8 LMS GT2, where they basically pick a car that's kind of from aerodynamically halfway between the GT4 and the GT3 car, and they give it 650 horsepower. In Porsche's case, instead of starting with a 911 GT3, they start with the 911 GT2 RS Club Sport. Other cars, even the Brabhams have got the BT63 concept, which is a slightly less ostentatious and barnstorming Brabham BT62. So still a steel space frame car, but much closer in terms of weight and performance to other cars in the class. So, and it's very much about focusing on the amateur drivers, which, if you cast your mind back to 2006 when GT3 kicked off, it was all about amateur drivers. The closest thing you could get to having a pro driver was having a mid-50s Tiff Needell driving a car in the European Championship for 30 minutes of a 60-minute race.
Speaking of GT3 and also GT racing in general, and even TCRs, coming up this weekend at Spa is a 12-hour race, Creventic 12-hour race. That'll be on YouTube live as well, with commentary from the team from Radio Show Limited, Radio Le Mans. So that'll be something to watch over the weekend as well. Doc, before we head off, any MotoGP? It sounds like from what he's been saying that Remy Gardner is not enjoying his debut year in MotoGP at this stage. It's not quite happening at this stage. It hasn't quite been.
Just a little bit of a storm in a teacup, with the injury, because the injury he's got with his wrist is, as he said last week, he's not going to recover and to get up to be fully comfortable with and up to speed, and to be able to probably be comfortable with the bike and get the most out of himself and the bike until maybe at least until a half year. And like all sports, you struggle with injuries to a certain extent. So look, he's in it for the long haul. He's just got to obviously manage his expectation upon himself, I suppose. And they're over in Portugal this weekend, so there's a lot of people sitting in Moto2 for year after year after year with just and just flick around the track week in, week out. So he's probably just going to have to put in perspective for the time being and see how it goes, because you can't expect to be on top of it if you're carrying something. And the other thing is as well, though, too, use as a learning curve, do everything you possibly can in all the right areas. And if you can't get it where you want to be each week in, week out, through the restrictions you got, So, plus you've got, obviously, the media is going to be, he's obviously with his name Gardner and Wayne's expectation as well, though, too, they're just going to have to, let it settle a little bit. So, anyway, we'll move on from that. The rumours are still circling about Told Thriller Miller about going back to Pramac next year. But look, he's got performed better than what his teammates have in both teams this year so far. Anyway, it's only because he's he can't hit the highs that they hit, and his lows are slightly better than what they are at the moment. So Bang Yong has had his counterpart, his teammate, must be really under pressure if Miller's bloody his contract is up at the end of the year. So, he only has to have a couple of good races and it'll all turn around. It'll have another signing anyway. That happens in lots of motorsport. So, anyway.
Well, hopefully he'll have a good weekend this week at that Algarve circuit. It's a fabulous track. Usually produces some really good racing. I know that the late Alan Simonson just absolutely loved that track. I remember sort of when he first raced there, and I saw some of the footage. I went and I spoke to him at Phillip Island, and I said that track looked, and he said that it is one of the best tracks I've ever raced at. So he really loved that track. I think everybody who races there does enjoy it, whether it's two wheels or four. So that's coming up this week. And as I said, if you've got KO, you can see it on KO. But even if you're not paying for it at the moment, the practice and qualifying for the Portuguese MotoGP will be on the freebie service. As of course, as I said, will be practice, qualifying, and the sprint race for Formula One as well. So keep an eye on that over the weekend. Hey, listen, we'll just say quickly, coming up this weekend for one reason or another, next Tuesday night on In Pit Lane, 8 o'clock on Channel 31, we're going to take you down to Phillip Island for the Phillip Island Historic Classic. putting that stuff together now for Tuesday night. We've got some great footage of some great cars down there and some interviews as well. So catch up with that. That's coming up this Tuesday night, 8 o'clock on Channel 31, right across free-to-air, right across Melbourne and Geelong, and of course on the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. But I think we might call it a day there, guys. Once again, our condolences to our mate Stuart Fairweather on the passing of his father earlier today. So Stuart, we're all thinking of you, and hopefully we'll see you back here. We'll see you back here sooner rather than later. But from all of us here, I think that's about all the time we've got for you on Full Course Yellow. So until we see you next week at 9 o'clock. Thursday night, Melbourne time, and whatever time it is when you're watching or listening, thanks for joining us, and from all of us until we see you next week, from everyone at In Pit Lane and Full Course Yellow, it's bye for now.